I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. Ron Cape, co-founder, chairman, and CEO of Cetus, the first biotechnology company, died earlier this month at 82. Cetus, which developed PCR technology as well as Betaseron and Interleukin-2, has faded from the minds of industry watchers, but its impact has been lasting. The company not only provided scientific, but financial and cultural innovations that helped shape the industry. Chiron acquired the company in 1991. We spoke to Mark Jones, Director of Research for the Life Sciences Foundation, about Cape, the innovations he made, and his lasting contributions. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Danny.
We had news at the beginning of the year that Ron Cape, a true visionary and the founder of Cetus Corp., the first biotechnology company, died. He was 82. Yeah, I've been a bit stunned by the lack of coverage his death has received, and I'm hoping you can help put into perspective for our listeners the role he played and the contributions he made in building the industry. Before there was a Genentech, before there was an Amgen, even before there was recombinant technology, there was Cetus. What was Cape's idea in launching a biotechnology company when there was no such thing, so to speak of?
Mm-hmm. You're right. Genentech is widely known as the first biotech company, and it was the first recombinant DNA company. But Cetus was founded 5 years earlier, also in the Bay Area, in Berkeley. And Ron Cape was one of the founders with his partner, Pete Farley, and Donald Glaser, who was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist who decided to change fields in mid-career after winning his Nobel Prize. And they struck up a partnership with Moshe Alafi, who was an entrepreneur, investor, and Berkeley bon vivant, well-known around town, friends in the local intelligentsia, and knew the beat writers, Lawrence Ferlinghetti and those people. And he was also a high-tech entrepreneur. And at that time, Cetus was founded in 1971. There was a lot going on in the San Francisco Bay Area. 1971 was the year that the Santa Clara Valley became Silicon Valley. There was so much going on there that it was attracting attention, worldwide attention, as the place for high technology. And I think Ron Cape at that time was working on a PhD at Berkeley in biochemistry. And he saw what was happening in Silicon Valley, and at the same time, there's a lot of entrepreneurial ventures being started in computing and software and information technologies, but also at Stanford, I think a lot of biomedical devices were being invented. In previous years, money from the NIH had flooded into high-profile research institutions such as Stanford, and that gave rise to efflorescence of technology, including biomedical technology. So I think Ron Cape saw that and saw opportunities there, and he was a biochemist, and he was well aware of. In fact, he said that he got into biochemistry because of Watson and Crick. The impression that in 1962 they were awarded the Nobel Prize for discovering the structure of DNA and opening up this new vista on biology and the secret of life. And he said at that time he felt that he saw the train leaving the station and he wasn't on it, and he wanted to get on it, and that's what led him into biochemistry and molecular biology. And then when he received his PhD, he started looking around for opportunities for practical applications. And that's the roots of the company.
Well, like other companies that followed, the initial impulse was to do everything agricultural, industrial, therapeutics. When was there a pairing of that vision, and what did it move the company from and to?
Mm-hmm. Well, the initial idea was to use some of Don Glazer's ideas, his technologies, mostly scanning technologies. He was a particle physicist and had invented the bubble chamber. He decided to move into biology and studied molecular biology and wanted to improve strains of bacteria that are used for industrial purposes. For example, production of antibiotics and industrial enzymes. So initially, the company was working on these systems that they would induce mutations in strains of bacteria and then select for strains that were good producers and would generate greater yields and better products. And that was the initial vision of the company, and for the first several years, and they had some success. This was a new technology, a new approach, and basically this is the first industrial genetics. And they established partnerships with many large corporations that did not have the technology but had funds to invest in speculative ventures, technology ventures like this one. So Standard Oil of Indiana was one of the companies that they partnered with, and I think the idea was to create microbes that would somehow improve the recovery of hydrocarbons, of oil, improve oil recovery. And they worked on that for some time, but it was interesting that you had this tiny startup working with this giant corporation, and they told Ron Cape, this is Ron Cape related to stories, that they told him, we're bigger than Sweden, we don't understand you and what you're doing. So this is really an important establishing this pattern where you have these tiny startups that have these exclusive technologies that the big corporations don't have. That was important for the biotech industry and that was a model. And really, Cetus established that.
Well, today a biotechnology executive has a lot of history to look at in terms of financing strategies, business models, a whole tool chest to draw from as to how to build and finance a successful biotech. None of these things existed at the time for Cape. How much of an innovator was he from a financing point of view or in terms of forming these types of partnerships?
Yeah, I think everything was innovative at that time because there were no precedents, and I think Cetus really was in the business of selling science, and they had to develop that, learn how to market that, and Cape and Pete Farley, his partner in particular, I think they were recognized as being very good at promoting the technology, and Moshe Alafe, who was a lead investor in the company, so he was impressed by their abilities to do that, and he said these two guys could sell the Brooklyn Bridge, and so they were very good at promoting the technology, even when it wasn't clear whether this stuff would work or not. There were questions. There were plenty of skeptics. Is this all hype? Is this, and Cape and Farley, I think, took plenty of heat from people what's the real stuff here? And Cape tells a story, a really funny story, about how they had various technologies and they're trying to promote them, and the marketing strategy that Cetus has, that this story represents it. And it's the story of a little boy who's looking forward to his 10th birthday, and his father sees this birthday as an occasion to teach his son some reality, teach him that the world isn't always a wonderful place, and there's sometimes disappointment. So the father fills a barn full of horse manure and tells his son, "This is your birthday present. Go into the barn and see." And he goes in, and there's big piles of horse manure, and the kid comes out, and he's got a big smile on his face. He's very excited. And his father, "I don't understand. What are you so excited about?" And his son says, "Well, with all that horse shit in there's got to be a pony around here somewhere." That was, the idea. We've got all these technologies. We're looking for applications. We're going to find out what works. We're going to work in a lot of different areas to see what we can come up with. And they did. They worked on industrial enzymes and the genetic engineering of microbes when recombinant DNA was invented, and Genentech got underway and showed that it could be commercialized. Cetus followed, although it's true that I think initially that Ron Cape would say that they were a little slow on that and didn't realize the immediate potential of recombinant DNA and didn't move on it immediately. So Genentech got ahead of them.
Well, I think one other thing Ron is noted for is his work in promoting the industry to both the public and policymakers, and seeing the need at that time to explain the new technology. How important was the work he did in that regard?
He was a very visible figure and an effective spokesperson for the technology and the industry. Initially, as you recall, there was a good deal of controversy about employing recombinant DNA in particular. There were fears that the use of the technology could generate biohazards. And there was a moratorium in the scientific community for some time, and people said, we need to be really careful. Ron Cape was at Asilomar on the California coast when scientists and journalists and legal scholars and others with interests in the issue met and considered how to proceed. So he was involved in that. He testified before Congress in the 70s several times about what the technology is, what are the real hazards, and what are the real possibilities. And he was involved in the formation in, I think the year was 1981, the formation of the first trade association to promote the interests of commercial biotech companies, and that was the Industrial Biotech Association. I think Les Glick at GeneX was the first president, and I'm not sure. Ron Cape may have been the second president, but they worked together to get together the original companies, and so Biogen, GeneX, Cetus, and a handful. Initially, Genentech did not join in, but they did shortly afterwards.
One of the great successes to emerge from Cetus, although maybe not properly appreciated at the time by management, was PCR technology developed by Chiron, who later won a Nobel Prize for this work. PCR, which amplifies minute amounts of DNA, is ubiquitous in labs and diagnostics today, not to mention TV crime labs. How significant would you say this was?
The invention? It was a fantastic. It was a giant leap forward. It solved many problems. Being able to make unlimited amounts of DNA. DNA was it was scarce. It was hard to find, and it was hard to produce. DNA synthesis was a difficult thing, and very tricky. But having this is basically a way of making unlimited copies of DNA. So it gave people supplies of this and move forward in science and move forward in technology and practical applications. And so that was huge. And it was the invention of Kary Mullis, and actually I think it was a difficult process. Kary Mullis was a brilliant guy, had a brilliant idea, but it took a team at Cetus to turn that into a product. And actually, I think here again, Ron Cape would say maybe they made some mistakes with that in commercial strategy in terms of the way they turned it into a product. But it was very important, and they did ultimately let it go because they decided Cetus had been criticized, all along for not being focused enough on making products and exploring too many technologies in too many different ways simultaneously. In the late 70s, and I think they got into recombinant DNA in a serious way, and then in the 80s really made the decision to become a therapeutics company. So PCR was, it was a good tool, but it wasn't the central focus of the company, and so they ultimately let it go.
At the same time, when Mullis proposed the idea of PCR, my understanding is while it was met with some skepticism, the company said, "Well, we'll take a year and make it work." How much of the groundwork of the culture that is the biotechnology industry, the science-driven culture, would you say Cetus helped nourish?
Yeah, I think Cetus is one of the places where that really began, and because Cetus was started by scientists. Ron Cape was a scientist, and it was the same at Genentech. And I think there was this understanding that basic inquiry. You really have to do these basic inquiries. You have to allow scientists the freedom to conduct the research and find out what can be done, how things work at a basic level, and then turn that into products. And I think that was always something at Cetus, where there was the policy was to preserve that kind of scientific freedom of inquiry, with the belief that would in fact yield practical results. And so scientists could publish, and somebody like Kary Mullis, who had a great idea, it's not, it wasn't, when he made the invention, it wasn't clear that it could be turned into a product. It wasn't clear that this was going to change the world, but he was given the freedom to develop it and to find out what could be done with it. And I think Cetus did a wonderful job with that. They had a great group of people working on that, and after PCR was sold, it was sold to Roche, that PCR group went with the technology and did great work later on in diagnostics, developing all sorts of applications for PCR and advancing the technology and improving it. So all of that started at Cetus, and that really did impact the entire industry. It was important.
Cetus pursued beta interferon as a cancer drug. It was not a success for them, but it later became an important MS drug, Betaseron. The other drug that was central to the Cetus story was Interleukin-2, which was seen as a breakthrough cancer therapy, potentially. Genentech and Immunex at the time were both seeking to do the same. How did that competition shape the early days?
Well, it was hugely important. And I think from the beginning, Cetus and Genentech, there was always competition there. And Genentech was always ahead with recombinant DNA and turning cloning genes and creating therapeutic recombinant proteins. And I think initially, in the early years, the Cetus was the first genetic engineering company, but then Genentech came along, and after that, the industry was known as Genentech and the Seven Dwarfs because they were way ahead of everybody. So everybody's trying to catch up, and Genentech was the model. And I think that focus on therapeutic proteins is, this is what we need to do. This is where the margins are. This is the right business strategy, and it's scientifically doable. So I think there was great pressure to engage in competition in that area. And, Cetus was one of many companies that was sort of following Genentech in that way.
Well, Cetus really bet the bank on Interleukin-2. There was a big buildup on manufacturing and on sales. And when the FDA delayed the approval of the drug, it really began to be the undoing of Cetus. I think at the time, Cetus merged with Chiron, which was forced into finding an acquirer. It was seen as a bit of a failure, the consequence of bad decision-making, overconfidence, and just expanding too fast. Cape wasn't CEO at the time these problems developed, but he was brought back in to try to preserve the company's independence. In retrospect, does Cape and Cetus get reappraised? What is his legacy?
Well, he's a pioneer. They made mistakes, and Ron Cape readily admitted that. But they were exploring a wilderness without a map, and they did great things. They invented PCR. They did those two drugs that the development began at Cetus, and they were later approved by the FDA. Chiron had them approved. So I would not call those projects failures. And the other thing that's important is one of the real contributions that Ron Cape made is Cetus became a model for sustaining innovative science and technology over many years. It takes a long time in computers and software. The development times everything moves much faster. So investors can get returns very quickly if the technology is successful. In biotech, I think initially there was hope that this is another Silicon Valley thing, and we'll get immediate returns and it's all great. But in fact, especially when you're talking about therapeutics that have to go through the regulatory process and FDA approval, it takes a dozen years, and that's a long time to sustain these hugely expensive projects. And Ron Cape and his colleagues at Cetus were one of the first to develop multiple strategies for enabling companies to advance and work on technologies over time.
So, as I mentioned, I've been a little surprised by the lack of coverage Ron Cape's death received. And I can go into some theories about journalism today, why that's so, but I'd like to hear from you as a historian and the work you're doing at the Life Sciences Foundation about why history matters, particularly the history of an industry. What do we learn from it? How does it inform the present and the future?
Well, it's almost a cliche that, if you don't pay attention to history, you're doomed to repeat it. I think looking at the history, first of all, to understand where we're at, it's necessary to go back and to understand the process. Well, here we are. How did we get here? And to understand why things are done the way they are, and to understand the realities of, for example, just the fact that it takes forever to make a successful drug, and I think that's something that the biotech industry had to learn over many years. Initially, the idea was that this is a new way of making drugs, and it's going to be better than pharmaceutical chemistry. It's going to be faster, and it's going to be cheaper. That turned out not to be true. I mean, the biological drugs have served as platforms. Biology has served as a platform for new treatment modalities, so it's improved the pharmacopoeia, but it hasn't been cheaper and it hasn't been easy. And so understanding that struggle, that I think that informs, it continues to inform entrepreneurs and investors.
Mark Jones, Director of Research for the Life Sciences Foundation, who's currently working on a history of the life sciences industry to be published in 2016. Mark, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Danny. Thanks for having me.
A few housekeeping notes. On our sister podcast, Rarecast, you can hear about a father's search for a cure for his son's rare disease as Alain Gonot discusses why he launched Solid Ventures. And starting January 16th, Pearlstein Labs' Ethan Pearlstein will discuss his experience with crowdfunding. Next week on the Bio Report, be sure to tune in for a look at the M&A scene with EY's Jeff Green. Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send an email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.